We are
Well, actually, I was, yeah.
we are recording. We are here with Mike. How are you doing today, Mike?
Oh, pretty good.
Excellent. So,
Um,
yeah, you've read some of my material. You had some constructive criticism. You wanted to kind of see if we could reconcile some of that. And why don't we just start diving into it? Kind of, what do you see could use some scrutiny here?
okay.
It can be in
Well, yeah,
broad
it was
terms.
this ethnocentrism. That was it. Yeah. You had this concept of ethnocentrism. Now, when I first learned that word, that was a term from sociology, having to do with people think their own ethnic group is better than the others. They're centered on their own ethnic group. And it's a term from sociology that applies to humans. But then you're applying it to ants and bees, hives, and things like that. And ants and bees don't have sociology. I mean, they're programmed. I mean, they're genetically programmed. They only have a limited range of behaviors. Like if you can get an ant to run in a circle while it's laying down its scent trail, it'll just keep running around the circle till it drops dead. Whereas other animals, they won't do that. They can break out of those kind of patterns because they have more gray matter, and so they can do things that the ants can't do. So since they're programmed, they don't really have ethnocentrism. It's just that they're all related because they're all sisters. So it's one big family, and the hive is the replicating unit. So in a way, it's a single organism, and so it evolves at the organism at the hive level because only the queen breeds. So there's only one individual ant in there that breeds, and all the rest of the ants are just like cells in the body. We don't think of usually as a body, as a human being a collective of individual cells, although it is. But we don't normally think about that unless you get a cancer. Then you get a cancer, you've got cells that go rogue, and now they're their own organism, and they're living inside you, and you have to take that out, or it kills you. Um, but most of the time, when you don't have a cancer, you don't think of the cells in your body as being independent life forms. You know, you think of yourself, the animal, as an individual. And then the same thing is with a colony of ants or bees. You wouldn't think of the individual ants and bees as individuals because they're not. They're part of the colony. The colony is the individual. So there really isn't ethnocentrism any more than there's ethnocentrism between different people. I mean, you can be selfish, but that's not the same thing as ethnocentric. Do you get what I'm saying?
So, are you aware of the percentage of like people who pass down their genes after, say, 500 years? Like, what if we take a given population, like a European population, an Asian population, and we survey those people? We all account for each of their individual genetic code, and then we fast forward 500 years, and we take another. We scan everybody. We look at all their genetic code, um, and look at those two time periods, let's say 1500 to 2024, what percentage of people living in the year 1500 have successfully passed on their genes to the present day? Do you have a
No, I don't know that.
okay?
I have
It,
to look into
I,
that.
you know, it depends on the time scale. So obviously, the further back we go, the more radical this is. But it's like 10%. 10% of people pass on their genetic code, and part of the reason for that is human beings are remarkably identical in their genetic code. Like we don't have a lot of variation
Mm-hmm.
genetically from one another, and so this would be my argument when you say things like, well, a colony is biologically determined because, especially in a bee colony, for example, the queen reproduces, nobody else reproduces. And therefore, it's one single biological organism. And I agree with you. I mean, that's a reasonable thing to say. But I would say with humanity, we are not as I don't think it's as individualistic. I don't think it's, for example, you could take um, a population of mosquitoes or a population of bacteria or something like that. And we have much more radical social hierarchies. And obviously, ant colonies or any colonial species has a radical reproductive hierarchy where 1% of 1% of 1% of all of the individual bodies in that colonial body is ever going to reproduce. We're not that extreme. We're not on the level of the bees and the ants and so on, obviously. But we are more radically socially hierarchical than many other species, like mosquitoes and germs, and we could list many other, where there's much more egalitarianism in terms of reproduction. Now, if we look in the last 200 years, as Francis Galton and others noted, that the hierarchical nature of reproductive success has started to break down and become more egalitarian over time. So you could then hypothesize from that we would also either, if that's related to ethnocentrism, then we should also become less ethnocentric over time, which I think has also happened. So, is our ethnocentrism genetically determined? I think it's genetically determined in the same way that wolves are ethnocentric. So you have different packs of wolves, and they will differentiate you're in my pack versus you're not. Now, how do wolves tell that? They have sensory data that allows them to identify other individual wolves. And that helps them understand, okay, this wolf is part of my pack, this wolf is not part of my pack. I'm going to create a friend-enemy distinction on that basis. Humans, we also use sensory data to distinguish ethnicities. And that's not always the case. During, World War II or something, the French and the Germans couldn't, look at each other's skin color or something and distinguish, but they wore different uniforms. So they were tapping into what I think is ultimately a biological mechanism, because our brain isn't our brain isn't a solid state drive. The brain is not a monolith. The brain is a cobbled together series of parts. Some of them are very ancient that go back to lizards,
Well,
and some of them are more modern.
I think part of the problem you're getting at is you're starting from the wrong end. You're looking at modern populations, and that's not the right place to start. It's better to look at small scale populations because they're easier to analyze. And they've looked at, relatedness in small bands and that kind of thing. And they find that the members of bands are not very related. Okay, the people who live in a band, these small scale societies, they generally are not very related. It's not like they're all family members. Because big small bands follow a process of outmigration. Either the females or the males, depending on the band and their particular culture, leave the band and go elsewhere and then find a mate there. Now, it's hypothesized that unlike in chimpanzees or in gorillas, where it's all on the band level, and they do that too, they have the same system. Because we have bigger brains, it's hypothesized that we have genetically evolved to live not as bands like the chimps do or like the gorillas do, but as tribal bands. So we were organized as bands. We lived in individual bands, but those bands were part of a tribe. And a tribe is a system where these bands have a kinship. And basically they think it's based on language. Basically, the other bands that speak the way you do are your tribe. And they've done studies with very young toddlers and looked at how they show, you might say, ethnocentrism, and it seems to be on speaking patterns. They did a study in Germany where they noticed that kids would tend to follow other kids who spoke the same way they did, the same accent, whether they were black or white. But if there was other kids that were of the same race as them, but spoke differently, they didn't see them as the same group. So they think that the genetically encoded definition of tribe is based on speech patterns or language. But that can be overwritten with anything you want by culture. And so, for example, they've done experiments with college students usually, where they artificially created tribes, short-term little tribes, and they've shown different behaviors by assigning people in these random groups that are totally completely arbitrary. I can't even think of an example of what they did, but they would create these two different groups by random things based on, I don't know, some criteria, and then they would start to favor members of their group. And it is just over the course of the experiment. I mean, I think in one case they brought him back a couple weeks later, and that effect was gone. So it doesn't last very long unless you reinforce it. But yeah, you can reprogram this in-group out-group dynamic that we have built in, which
So
is what this tribal thing is.
yeah, no, I agree that you can reprogram people's ethnocentrism. And because we are more cognitively advanced, we have greater degrees of freedom in that than basically all other animal species. Because we are a linguistic species, yes, absolutely. Language is one of the most important aspects of ethnic identity. It's why French people are different from German people. For the most part, it's not that they're radically genetically different or that they look different, but they speak a different language. But I disagree that with your, I don't know what study you're referencing in terms of this linguistic ethnocentrism that children have, but there was a study done in 2017 that came out of the University of Toronto by Professor Kang Lee, where they showed infants ages or 6 months old to 9 months old, and by 9 months old, the infants had a negative reaction to faces, not to language, but to faces of babies of another race, and they had a positive reaction. Of course, these are not absolute 100% necessarily, but this was the general trend that was found. So this is a difficult thing to explain using like a linguistic hypothesis of ethnocentrism. The what I derive from this is that human beings, like packs of wolves, like chimpanzees, like gorillas, like all of these different species, we use sensory data as part of our ethnocentrism. And this is a pre-linguistic function that's encoded in our brains that comes from, long before we evolved to become humans. With, it can be an evil thing that we try to work against, but it is there. And, again, it's not an absolute. I'm not saying that humans are in the same way that people can be celibate, even though we have a genetic drive to reproduce. Humans can choose to be celibate. We can also choose not to be ethnocentric if we want to make that choice, because we have that cognitive capacity. Whereas you said the ant has to walk in a circle. It doesn't have another choice. We do have greater degrees of freedom as individuals, but it doesn't mean that ethnocentrism is not somehow biologically ingrained in us in the same way that it's biologically ingrained in other mammals and primates and so on.
Well, it's only in those animals, like for example a wolf, where they would recognize their own family in that case. But you see wolves, I think wolf packs are families.
Yeah, I mean
So
every
there it might be by smell, because even people can sometimes tell their families by smell. Okay, at least women can. I mean, I can't, but my wife can sometimes. And uh, but that would be a related thing. But when you have these primate groups, I'm not sure how it works to primates. I mean, I'm not sure how a primate, like a chimp, how a chimp recognizes the other. And maybe it does. It is by view. But yeah, they recognize the group, a chimp that is not in their group. and they'll sometimes attack it. Okay, and people do that too. Okay, in small groups, and some not all small groups do this, but some of them do. If a stranger walks into their territory, they'll attack it if they have the numbers and kill. And just like the chimps will do that sometimes. They had an example of Jane Goodall reported on a chimp war. There was a group of chimps that got too big, and it split in half, and there were two groups, and then they went to war with each other, and one of them wiped out the other and took their territory. Then later on, they went to war with somebody else. So so that happens with chimps, and I imagine it happens with people too, modern day small groups, and presumably they did in the past too. They would have conflicts with other groups, but it seems that we have this additional layer, that there's a tribal layer that we're wired for, so that we have like two levels that we're wired for, and all of our hierarchies that we have beyond that are cultural constructs that use that scaffolding,
Yeah, that would be.
scaffold, and then they build it up from that. So they say that a lot of organizations, like in the army and in business, consist of groups of relatively equal people with somebody maybe a little ahead of them, and then you operate at that level, and you don't have a lot of operation between people multiple levels apart. Like when you work at a job, you hardly ever interact with a vice president if you're like a scientist, like I was. Okay, you'd interact with your own manager a lot, and you might interact some with the guy above him, but you wouldn't be interacting with people 3 or 4 levels above you. Okay, generally they would interact with middle managers who they interact with. That's their team, and that's who they work with every day. And so you have these layers built up like that operate sort of like a hunting band or something. That's what how Turchin described it, or maybe it was Henrik. It's one of the it was either Turchin or one of the cultural evolution guys. I don't know if you're familiar with that. See, I'm a fan of cultural evolution. That's kind of how I think a lot of humans developed. It's gene culture coevolution. They evolve together, but it's not all genes, because genes are too slow.
Yeah, I
Because there's a
agree that it's not all genes. And I agree that most ethnocentrism is not genetically determined, and most ethnocentrism is not, based on phenotype or appearance. And that's true. It's also the case in the animal kingdom that most ethnocentrism is not through sight or visual. The sense of smell for most animals is more important in identifying individuals. Human beings are sort of interesting in that we have a lot of facial recognition memory. We're very visual creatures. We've sort of lost our sense of smell, and you might be able to speak better than I can about the mechanism, the evolutionary mechanism behind that. Why did we lose our sense of smell? Why did we become so sight dependent? Some of it might be because we tended to be a diurnal species. We hunt in the day, not the night. Whereas if you're a night hunter, it's very important that you have a good sense of smell so you can track your prey. We didn't need that. We were
Also, they have better eyesight too,
right.
because they also, like wolves and predators at night, they have better eyesight at night because they don't have color vision. See, we
Yeah,
have color vision. So we have cones in our eyes instead of rods. We have some rods and some cones, whereas the predators, they're all rods. So they have much better night vision because they can absorb more, they can detect more light, but they can't see in color. We can see in color, and that's useful for picking fruits and determine which fruits are ripe, and which to detect subtle differences in vegetation around you, which is useful if you're a forager like we are. So that's our, I say that's the thing. We went with vision, so we have color vision, and we can detect make all kinds of detailed um, assessments about the vegetables because we're omnivores. We eat everything, So um, that's probably why we went that way. And we're not predators by design. I mean, evolutionarily, by biological evolution. I mean, we're not genetically evolved to be predators because we don't have any of the tools. We don't have claws. Uh, we lost our muscles. We lost our guts. We can't digest raw foods very well. We can't digest raw meat very well. Um, we can't detoxify foods very well. There's a lot of foods that other animals can eat, and if we eat them, it makes us sick. You know, because we're all limited. Our guts are limited. Because guts are expensive energetically, muscles are expensive energetically, and we have big brains, which are also very expensive energetically. So we put all our calories into our brains, and then we lost our muscles and our guts. And we don't need the gut because we cook. Once we cook, the guts aren't necessary anymore, and and variants that don't have that and genetic variants that didn't have such big guts and long shorter guts were less energetically expensive, and so they won out. So we lost a bunch of our guts. Same thing with the muscles. The more gracile humans uh, required fewer calories, had better survival and reproductive success, and so we tended to get less muscular with time. And but we got that because of we could cook, and because we developed spears, and so we could throw projectile weapons. We evolved muscles and our skeletal arrangement, our joints, and our shoulders, so that we can throw hard and accurately, which chimpanzees and gorillas can't do. I mean, monkeys will throw, but they don't throw with any kind of accuracy. Whereas a human, with practice, throwing a rock can be pretty dangerous. Okay, you think about it. We don't have uh, claws or anything, but if a predator is running at you and there's like 6 or 8 of you in a party, right, and you got rocks and you're throwing them with force like a baseball pitcher, accurately, and so this lion's running up at you, gets 8 of these in the head, probably go somewhere else, if you don't stun it or kill it. And then think of what if you had a pointed rock, and you threw the pointed rock in such a way that it goes point first into the animal that's charging you, right? Well, in that case, it would penetrate into your body, and the way you make that happen is you tie a stick to it, and that's a spear. You throw those, and that made humans even more deadly. So by the time we had spears, we were apex predators. So without having any of the genetically evolved equipment that most apex predators have, because we had culture, we could build tools.
Yeah, so my
Yeah.
disagreement with that would be to ask you the question. Five species most closely related to humans. Two living would be chimpanzees and gorillas. Three non-living would be Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus. Would you dispute that any of those five species are predators?
Well, I don't think gorillas are predators.
Okay. Yeah, we can look up the.
I think they're. I
They
think
do have
gorillas are.
canines though, don't they?
What?
Don't gorillas have canines?
Well,
Aren't
yeah,
they pretty
yeah, yeah.
strong? I mean,
Yeah. They have canines. We have canines too, but I don't think chimpanzees hunt. I'm not sure if gorillas do.
yeah, gorillas are omnivores. So they eat snails, ants, worms, larvae. So it doesn't. When I say gorilla is a predator, I don't mean that a gorilla is hunting deer or something like that, but just saying the strict biological definition of a predator is some form of either carnivorous or omnivorous activity. And so, a gorilla is.
Oh no, no. I mean, carnivorous means that you eat primarily meat. Predator means you do hunt. It means you kill prey.
Yes, and gorilla do kill prey when they eat animals. So
Yeah.
gorillas are, by a biological definition, they are predators. They're not as much of a predator probably as we are. I think we probably eat more meat than the average gorilla, but they are so all five of those species, which are the most closely related species to humans, are predators, which to me indicates that the further we go back in our evolutionary history, the more likely we are to be predators. And so I don't buy the idea that humans in the ancient past were vegetarian and then because of cultural evolution they started hunting. I think it's the opposite. I think we started off hunting and then because of cultural evolution we became more vegetarian in our diet. And actually, 10,000 years ago when that happened, we introduced agriculture. That was extremely uh, basically a form of malnutrition. So people got shorter immediately, like not slowly over time due to genetic evolution, but within a very short time span, agricultural populations became shorter by about 6 inches because they weren't getting proper nutrition because humans biologically are meant to eat meat. And when the agricultural revolution
No,
happened,
no, no, no. Their humans are naturally are omnivores.
they are,
They
and
eat a
they're and
variety.
part of our omnivorous
I mean,
diet is meat.
if you look at small scale societies, they eat all kinds of stuff.
Yes, you have to understand that when I say we need meat in our diet, I'm not saying that we need to exclusively eat meat. So it's not a either or situation. It's to say that in order to get a complete protein, in order to support the kind of musculature that a Neanderthal needs, or Homo erectus or Denisovan are closely related extinct human groups, in order to get the musculature necessary for modern healthy development, in order to get the nutrition that we need, ancient human populations, and I'm talking about prior to agriculture, needed to have meat in their diet. That was a necessity. Now, with agriculture, you decreased meat consumption because you replaced that with breads, starches, fruits, vegetables, and that immediately had a negative impact on health in terms of there was a decline in height.
Well, I know that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm familiar with
and there
that.
was
But when
there
they
was
look at
tooth decay as well. So we're not
right,
biologically evolved for this vegetarian agricultural diet. If anything,
well, we're not biologically evolved for a heavily starch based diet, which is where you get the tooth decay and stuff like that, with lots of sugars and starches and things of that sort. But we didn't eat a lot of that. I mean, although we ate a lot of plant foods, it's a wide variety of plant foods, and we also ate meat when we could get it. But they believe that humans started out mostly as scavengers, because we couldn't be. I mean, a predator preys on other animals, and I don't think eating snails counts as preying as other animals for an animal our size. That's scavenging. That's like eating, eating worms and snails and termites, like chimpanzees do. That's gathering. Hunting is when they go after animals, and chimpanzees do kill small game. Not that often, but they do. And early humans are believed that we mostly started out as scavengers because we couldn't really take down the big game yet because we didn't have the equipment to do that. We don't have the built-in. We don't have the claws. We can't run fast. Okay, uh, so we can't really hunt the way lions and tigers and other predators do. And so what we were was persistent hunters. After we developed some weapons, we would basically run after prey